Red lights
Uh,
on.
yeah, it looks like that. So, uh, governance. Uh, it's a bit funny that Simon did the first section today about life cycle management and requests and things like that. You could always argue, obviously, joiner, mover, and lever is probably not governance, but you're governing the joiner, mover, lever, and processes, right? And request and approval workflows and so on is most people probably refer to that as being identity governance. You have to have some kind of divider somewhere, so we put it here in this material. But you could argue that we actually already talked quite a bit about identity governance. Uh, so what's identity governance per se, right? It is literally a way to actually get insights and control so you can govern what people have access to. And it all pins down to the simple question. Uh, the people we have within our organization or people or machines or whatever identities who have access to our resources, are they the right ones? Do they have the appropriate access? Do they have access to things that they shouldn't, and so on and so forth? Now, this is definitely where an IGA platform is different to a synchronization engine, like you're synchronizing uh, user account information from one system to another, for instance. The problem with that is that it's really hard to answer the question, what access to this particular user account have in this particular system, and how did it gain that access? So that's sort of, if you can't answer those questions, you're most likely not gonna pass more complex regulation, for instance. You can't argue and say that you're compliance if you can't answer the question, do you know who has access to what and why they have this access and how did they gain that access? Now, obviously what you see on the screen here is what we call a heat map. And when luckily I am happily colorblind, but I've learned that much. There are some difference between the colors, right? However, most people, when they say we need governance, they probably refer to the fact that they want to do some kind of access review. Now, access reviewing is the difference between access review and a request and approval is that an access review will look at what people actually already have and make a decision. Someone needs to make a decision. Is this correct or is it incorrect? Uh, and if you look at the Identity Manager application, it has a lot of information. There's going to be a lot of data that is synchronized into it, not only identity information, but also information about target system and how objects relate to each other in that target system. And of course, also the relationship between identities, the relationship between identities and business objects such as roles or organizational roles. It's also the relationship between the roles and entitlements, and if roles have relationships to technical roles, for instance, and to be able to do reviews, we can potentially review any relationship we have inside Identity Manager. But to make it easier, the product comes with some pre-defined attestation policies, as we call it. An attestation policy is literally a configuration that determines what are we looking at, what relationship are we going to attest, how often we're going to attest it, and also who is going to be, what kind of workflow is it going to follow when the attestation policy runs or when you have your campaign running, uh, what approval policies applies to this particular attestation campaign, as you might call it. Um, we also have um, two things that you should talk to your customer about when they want to do this. First, of course, you should look at things like um, we should look at the origin of things, right? We can, as you saw Simon multiple times showing you, very governance or governance functionality, he looked at, for instance, he took his Steve Bailey, I think the name was, and he looked at some entitlements that that person have, and he could see why. He answered the question. He looked at the entitlement origin and say, hey, this comes from a request. This comes from the fact that he has this business role or belongs to this organization. And if you look at the entitlement origin, we can also say that maybe we should not attest entitlements that a person has that they got from a role, for instance. In that case, you should instead say, should this person have this role or not? So that the origin can drastically decrease the number of decisions. Because what you don't want to do, and no organizations wants to do, they don't want to drown certain people, typically line managers and others in the organization. You have to make a lot of decisions next week because we are running our attestation campaign, our quarterly or yearly, and they have to make thousands of decisions, and they're probably going to say select all, approve, because they can't be bothered. So look at things that make sense instead, right? Don't look at everything. And in the same way as we have, you saw Simon showing recommendations when he requested something, where we had a product that used the workflow that calculates a recommendation to provide that to the approver. We can do the same thing with attestations. So we can run an attestation, and it could look like this. And if you have experience from the previous web portal we had in the product, that is often referred to as the web designer web portal, we didn't have the attestation case is presented as a question, but we have started doing that now. So now if you look at it, you can see that can superuser binary superuser's business role be assigned to the identity Ingvar Johansson? And I would obviously argue, of course, right? But if you look at can the application developer business role be assigned to Ingvar? Maybe not, right? Or test engineer, should that be assigned to this particular individual? And then you can make a decision. Yes, it's okay. Or no, he or she should not have that anymore. And we could also see if this has been attested before. We could also see if it poses some kind of risk. And obviously, it sort of makes sense that a role called super users should pose some kind of risk, not that much in this particular example. So this is what it can look like, unless you use recommendations, because then it will look like something like this. In this case, it's should the application Adobe Acrobat system entitled be assigned to the user Rita Andersson? And then we could see, I can deny it, I can approve it, but I could also see recommendation. And this one is red and this one is green, right? So I can click on the recommendation button in the very same way as you saw Simon doing for request. It's also available for attestations. And if you click on it, it will then give you why the decision is to either deny or approve. In this particular example, you can see that based on the analysis, the recommendation is to approve it. And as you can see, it went through all these analyses and nothing were strange here, right? The peer group analysis in this particular example, well, 86% of the identities within that peer group, they also have this, so maybe it's okay. Historically, it always has always been attested as approved and is not risky and is not violating any rules. So this is probably either you can configure a workflow that the recommendation automatically approves it. You don't even have to bother the tester, or you present something like this for the person who has to make these decisions. Obviously, if you look at the workflow, you can then see in this particular example, and let's say that I am a compliance manager or security officer. I want to look at decisions made already, and then I could see, well, the peer group analysis calculated that it's not enough peers that has it, but it was approved by the identity, the person's manager. So I can take a look at it from an audit perspective. If I'm a compliance manager or if I'm an auditor, I can see what people already have made, what kind of decisions they have made already. And as I mentioned, there's quite a few, oh, sorry. That was not my intention. There's quite a few attestation policies out of the box, and it depends on the number of modules you select when you install. Obviously, if you don't have the module with integration to safeguard a PAM platform, these will not be there, of course, right? But as you can see, you can do a lot of different things without. This is purely predefined things, and then you can use them. You can copy them if you want, if you want to modify them, or you can use them and run those attestations. You can configure different conditions, of course, if you don't want to select everything. But these are attestation policies that are for this particular installation out of the box things. Now, let's take a look at it, right? Now, I'm going to hopefully be able to back out there and bring up the environment. You saw, that's not good. Sorry for that. I need to log in again into my lab. That's a bit strange. That never happened before. It was just a timeout in some way or another. There you go. So obviously, you saw it's the same demo lab that you saw Simon showing a while ago. What I wanted to remind you, and you have to keep me honest now, Susanne, did you also send out this lab guide to everyone for this boot camp?
Not yet, but tonight, after I have all the participants, I will share all of this, yes.
Okay, perfect.
So I think this is, yeah. Sorry. I think this is also downloadable from the lab portal, right?
Yeah, once you, yeah, exactly. Good point. Thank you. Once you test, or if you want, or if you already had tried the Bootcamp lab, then you could see that it's actually downloadable. And also, if you look at the client machine in the lab, this is exactly the same lab as you have access to. The document is on the desktop here, but it's also possible for you to download it. Now, obviously, it's kind of handy to have it as a separate file. Now, the Bootcamp use case document is written in a way that you should be possible, even if you haven't touched the product for any time in your life, it should be possible for you to first, of course, follow how do I log in, how do I log on to the web portal, and this will contain that secret password, right? So if I go to log on to the web portal, use this password, right? And it's literally the password in the demo lab. But if I go back to the index again, as you can see, there's quite a few use cases that are documented. You saw quite a few of them you've seen today because Simon literally used some of these use cases, not necessarily with the users, but he definitely took you through quite a few of these use cases. And as you can see, if we go down here, there are some use cases for attestations as well. Now, as you can see, the use cases for attestations here are typically we can create an attestation, we can attest stuff, we can monitor the progress, and we can look at attestation recommendations, but you don't have to. It actually also documented when you go here. You can, on the first use case, you can actually log on as one of the managers here, and there are some ongoing attestations already. So I'm actually going to do that if I close that guy first. Bring up the this web portal, same one that Simon was using, and I'm going, no, not that one. Go to the web portal, not the password reset. And if I log in now as I believe it's the sales manager Hans Pettersson. There's a lot of Swedish names in this system, not only, I would say. So if he logs on, as you can see, he already had, let's bring it up to full screen here. He already has 11 pending. He should make 11 decisions. That's what it literally says. So if he clicks on Explore here, he could see these are the 11 decisions he needs to make, but he hasn't done it yet. So you can see it's way overdue because this lab is literally a copy from a template. So and it was some time ago, and the last time this template was updated. So obviously the time limit has gone, but it will still look perfectly fine, and you can still make decisions. And you can click on the first one here, and we can see, okay, so we are running an attestation policy called demo. 80 group memberships from request. So we are testing group memberships that people have access to based on the fact that they have requested them. And this is exactly what we're looking at. We're looking at a system entitlement called Applications SQL Server Studio. We can see that there's a user account called Matthias Fischer. The identity is also, of course, Matthias Fischer, but this is the identity record. We can see the actual path. So anyone who's seen an AD group, it looks like an LDAP, or at least most likely an AD group, which it is in this case. And there's also a description here, what this particular AD group, this is the description from the AD group. Now, I can now make a decision. I can say approve, or I can say deny, right? So if I, for instance, say I deny that one, and I can give a reason, as you can see, there is no star here, so it's not something I have to say, but I can say, oh, I select one. I don't have to, but I did, just because I'm friendly. And I deny that one, and then I could say I select all of them, and then I say I'm going to approve the rest, right? So let's say approve here, and I can say all okay as a comment for all these. And now I'm doing multiple decisions at one time. So now it's empty. So now Hans Pettersson has literally done his job. So he can safely log out. Now, there is a user inside this solution called Ben Paxton. And if you look in the this document, if I, for instance, say I want to create an attestation, it's always this user ID, because Ben Paxton is what it says here. He's a member of a long list of identity manager application roles, which means that he has a lot of capabilities inside the identity manager application itself. So he's going to log on, Ben P. And there is actually, he also has a pending attestation case. He can take a look at it. There's some primary department says Spain for this. Is this correct or not? Well, I couldn't be bothered right now, and it's also, of course, overdue. But he can take a look at attestation runs, actually, things that are running right now. And you remember the demo AD group memberships from request? It actually was created in January this year. The due date was in January, but as you can see, there are no pending decisions. It's actually 100% done. So if I open that one up, I can see who was the decision. That's actually a bug. But he could see that the completion is literally mostly approved, but some denials as well. And he can also look at the cases, the actual decisions made. And as you saw, there was a denial here. And what he also can do, of course, he can download a report. And this is like a report that a lot of auditors, they want to see these kind of reports. Have you done your access reviews? And the report, literally, you can, of course, modify this to your needs, but this is the out-of-the-box report. So this is the attestation campaign or the attestation policy. We can see when it was started. We could also see at which time decisions were made and by who. So we can see the actual, okay, Julia Becker, should she has this application service studio? Well, it was approved by Hans Pettersson, and it was now, as you can see, with a comment, all okay. And there should be a denial down here somewhere. Hey, look, this was actually denied by, and you can see that the decision is denied because the job specification does not require this access. And obviously, when you're doing things like this, we are going to also reach out and remove whatever access I denied, right? So it's not just going to be a dead repo. There's a hand in the air. There is a question.
Yes, yes. I just wanted to
Yeah.
know if this attestation is in any way linked to the compliance rule in IT shop.
Sorry?
Yeah, I said I just wanted to know if this attestation is in any way linked to the compliance rule in IT shop.
In this case, no, because this is an attestation that has no relationship to a rule or a policy, but you can do that. But in this case, it's just something that was configured, run this and test everyone. We want to make sure that things that people actually requested, that they still should have things that they requested and were entitled. So obviously, and as you can see, these are just some samples in this lab that we have been running quite a few years ago. Obviously, there's no actual users, right? So nothing happens in this lab. It's very little user activity, but it's very easy for you to create your own attestation and run something yourself and see what it looks like and determine exactly. And for that purpose, in the lab guide, there is obviously how do I create an attestation policy. And from the web UI, right? So this is carefully documented. How can you do this from this particular use case example, right? Yeah.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is, let's say I create an attestation now, right? Is it possible, like, I see that, for example, the review that you just did, so you have the opportunity to, as an auditor, maybe approve or deny the access, like, okay, should a user have access to, let's say, Office 365, and then you approve or you deny. So what I'm saying is that also tied to the rule in the IT shop? Like if you deny that, if you create a workflow in IT shop to run through compliance, it does not affect it, right? So you have to create another rule for that IT shop, right?
No,
rule.
it's actually not going to be a rule in the IT shop, because if you let's say that you test a person if they have access to Office 365 or something, right? And it could originate from the IT shop in the way that these examples, because they were requests, right? But it doesn't have to be requests. It could be things that you have, someone gave you that, right? And you shouldn't have it. So it literally doesn't really have anything to do with the IT shop. But what we've done inside this particular example is that if you deny it, we will reach out and remove it from the person. And if the person then goes in and take a look at it, what he will see is that he can also see in the workflow, because he requested it in the first place. So we can actually see, I requested it at this point in time. It was approved by someone at this point in time, and later on it was actually removed through attestation at this point in time. So that's will be in the workflow. Yeah, absolutely. But it sort of needs to originate as a request first. And this was just an example. Primary department memberships for Spain here, for instance, it doesn't originate from an IT shop request, but you can still attest it. And if you deny it, we are going to remove whatever is denied. And you don't have to have one level of sort of attestation, because you can create an attestation workflow. If I show you that or show you all of you this from the manager tool, I go to the attestation menu instead, and I go to basic configuration data. And as you can see, there are approval workflows here. And if I pick one here and just open it up, it's the same workflow engine, but the context is access reviews or attestations. So you could say that, let's say that I'm a manager and I say no, but that no could then go to someone else to make a final decision before it actually, at the end of as you can see, this is the last step here. If everyone says no to this particular workflow, it will automatically removal, and you remember you don't, of course, right? But this is actually triggering an event called auto remove, and we have processes listening to that event and then will perform the actual deprovisioning of whatever was denied through this workflow.
Okay, so it's just like a second validation of whatever access you have. So if even though you have been granted access by a manager in IT shop, attestation can still remove it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly what I just did in this particular example where Hans said no to something. That literally took away something that was requested in the first place, approved by someone, and then denied through the access review. Because just because you have requested something that was approved, it could still be that things have changed in the organization and you shouldn't have that anymore. And we didn't automatically remove it, so we are doing an access review upon it instead, right? And then any denial will be end up in a removal. So it depends on the processes the customer wants, right? What we try to show you with this tool is that you could probably configure any process that will be a good match to what the actual requirement is from the customer. Having said that, there's a lot of things out of the box, and if that's good enough, then don't spend too much time on customizing things, right? But you can build your own approval workflows. You can build your own attestations that looks for things that we didn't think of. But if it's in the database and if it's a relationship that you can read, you can do an attestation for it or do an access review upon it. It's extremely flexible, but it's also designed in a way that should be as simple as possible to actually do.
One thing I'd like to add, if I may, if you log out and then log back in again as the user that was doing the attestations, if it's an attestation for, let's say, an entitlement that
was it Hans or the affected user?
No, the user that was doing the attestations.
That was Hans, right?
Hans was it. And if you go into attestations, I know.
Oh well, I need to look at my history then. And I look at the denied one.
No, what I was going to say is that if it was actually an audit rule failure, then actually what would appear in the listing of all the audit conditions is a little icon that will say, audit rule violation.
Yeah.
So it'd actually highlight it for the actual person that's doing the attestation, and you could then see that audit rule. So yes, you could trigger them. You can trigger an attestation based on an audit rule failure. So when it fails an audit, you can then trigger something that says, okay, these two entitlements need to be attested, and then of course the person that's doing the attestation can then remediate it by denying it or denying one of them perhaps. But you could also see those violations as well if they are causing an issue.
Thank you, Simon.
No problem.
So I don't want to run completely out of time. So as I said in the use case document, you can try this out yourself afterwards and try to configure your own attestation, of course. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is literally, we already touched upon this, and that's the roles inside Identity Manager. Now, Identity Manager is very much a role, it's built upon roles. So even an IT shop structure, as you saw Simon showing you how the IT shop is built up, that's also actually role-based. But if we talk about roles in the context of being roles, Identity Manager has support for 3 types of roles. We have business roles, and business roles could be static, which means that you assign identities to them manually. You assign identities to a role and they will be a member of the role, or they could be dynamic. You already seen an example of that where you have a role that has a calculation node that determines who should be the members of the role. And then we have technical roles inside Identity Manager, and they're called system roles. And a system roles is quite simple. It's literally just a container where you can assign entitlements, you can assign resources, account definitions. You can even make a system role member of a business role. And a system role could also have a system role. No, it cannot, right? I'm not sure actually, but you can definitely have multiple system roles inside a business role, for instance, as an example. System roles are very straightforward, very simple to configure. Business roles are slightly more complicated, but we're going to take a look at it, of course. And then we have, sorry, the internal authorization model is also role-based, and they are called internal role. They are called identity manager application roles. Those are roles that gives you capabilities and permissions inside the identity manager application itself. And some of them are literally dynamic because, for instance, if you are a person or if identities refer to you as their manager, you're automatically going to be a member of an identity manager application role, and I think it's called manager of identities or something like that. And that gives you permissions inside identity manager so you can see the people you are manager for. Now, again, we're going to stick to business roles now because business roles are, I wouldn't say complex, but very configurable. First of all, business roles supports either top-down or bottom-up inheritance. Now, most people understand top-down inheritance because that is, it's sort of acting in the same way as group memberships, for instance. And you can build any number of hierarchies of business roles. And you can also, of course, configure business roles that has a bottom-up inheritance. For instance, if you want to have roles for a project where literally the project manager has all the entitlements at the top instead of at the bottom of it, right? Now, if you do a vanilla installation of Identity Manager and you want to create your first business roles, the only way to do that is that you have to create at least one role class because a business role will belong to a role class. Now, the role class is literally the object that determines two things. It determines the inheritance direction, and once you select an inheritance direction, you can't change it. And also, and this is one of the things that is sometimes very easy to forget, you also have to configure what's allowed to be assigned to business roles of this role class that you have created. So if you forget that, you can still create business roles, but you can't assign anything. You can't put entitlements into them. You can't put identities into them. And if that's not possible, you probably forgot to configure the assignable objects. Now in this demo, and you can have as many role classes as you wish, of course, right? Now, and inside a role class, you can have as deep or as many role hierarchies as you wish as well. So it's very flexible. Now, in the demo environment, we do have a role class called job roles. It's just a name. If you don't like it, you can change it to something else, of course. Now, there are some, I think it's a plus 50 or something business roles that we have created just for you to have something to play around with. And it's a hierarchy, and it starts with a, I think it starts with, not demo, but if, for instance, since it's hierarchical, we do have a role called development, and then under development, we have application development, development manager, and so forth. So there's some different hierarchies depending on where those roles should belong in the organization. Now, again, once you, and as you can see, they are top down in inheritance, so you can't really change that after you have created your role class. You can create more role classes and you can create more roles, of course. And the one thing that is easy to forget when you create your own role class is to configure the role assignments. If you don't do that, And the list here depends on the number of modules you have installed. So if you forget this, you can create roles, but you can't do anything with them. So again, that's at least I've made that mistake more than once, and I'm sure Simon has.
Yeah. Why can't I assign nailed app groups? Of course I haven't actually assigned it.
Yeah, it's not possible, right? And we do have. I know a couple of customers. They have configured a role class, business role classes, and the only thing that they are allowed to assign into the roles are identities and system roles, because they model their application access through system roles. And the system roles will have all sorts of different system entitlements and account definitions and so on. However, the role can only contain system roles and identities. So very simple in that case, right? Now, once you have created roles and you assign ownership, and the ownership is literally the manager of a role. Once you have that, you can allow the role owner to do quite a lot from the web portal. They can, of course, manage entitlement, and I'm not sure if you remember, but Simon showed you, at least on a slide, that you can't really assign a membership and press save. It will literally be a request. And the same goes for entitlements. You can't add more entitlements and then save it. It will be a request. However, in the demo lab, we do not have any approval, manual approval needed. So it will be approved, but you still have to submit your request to change a role, to add members to it, or to add entitlements to a role or a business role. If you're an owner, you can split a role into two roles, and you can compare roles, and you can also compare and merge roles. You can say, I want this role and this role to be merged into one role. Now, if you accidentally delete a role, you could actually also have the right to restore a deleted role. And if you want to change something, revert something that you have changed to role, we do support rollback changes based on point in time. And that's our way of supporting role versioning. And I would argue and say it's more fine-grained than traditional role versioning. Of course, there are reports available. And there's also a sort of AI-driven functionality where you can create a role, add some members to it, and then say, give me some recommended entitlement based on what the members have actually added to the role, what they have. And there is a use case documented in this lab guide, so you can try that out as well. So obviously, if you're a role owner, or if you're a super user like Ben Paxton, you can, for instance, select one of the business roles and then click on this little button with 3 dots on here at the bottom and select, for instance, split or compare and merge or reset to previous stage. That's available functionality. And if you want to do a splitting a role, for instance, in this case, I've selected the business role PR. It's very hard to see, but I've selected the PR role. You can see it here. And then I selected, I want to split this role into the Nordic PR role, and obviously keep the PR role as well. So it will ask you for a name of your new role, of course, and then it will ask you to what are you going to do with the content of the role. And this could be quite cumbersome, of course, and hard work, but typically you see entitlements. In this case, it's Active Directory groups only. You can say, I'm going to move this one to the new role. I'm going to keep and copy, and this keep and do not copy, and keep and copy in this. So the new role will be slightly different, and the old role will be slightly different. And before you click the finish or the split button, it will actually give you a summary. This is what's going to happen now. You are going to create a new role, and this is what's going to happen to the affected role, marketing PR role, and so on. And it's pretty handy, actually. Now, I'm actually going to skip the demo on this because it's not necessarily the most fantastic thing to see. However, we're going to step into something that we actually saw a bit of not that long time ago, and that's the rules. Now, rules or audit rules, as they are called. So there is an audit rule engine built into Identity Manager. But before I forget, were there any other questions regarding roles?
There's nothing on the chat.
And no one has raised their hand or unmuted themselves?
Nope.
Huh? Well, you have to interrupt me, and it's fine if you come up with a question later, of course. Now, there is a built-in company policy engine and audit rules engine inside Identity Manager. We haven't talked about licensing or anything, but you should know that customers are allowed to use roles. They are allowed to use audit rules and company policies without paying any extra license money. We are not charging for the functions that are in the product once you have a license for it. Now, this built-in engine, an audit rule engine or compliance rules engine, it works in two ways. It can detect existing violation, and of course, it can also prevent a violation to occur. And there are some examples also for this in this use case lab, of course, where you can try it out. I think there was a question this morning, and Simon talked about it. And there is a documented use case where a person logs on to the portal, try to request something extra, and the portal will tell you, hey, this violates a rule. So if you continue, it might be denied, right? So obviously, if you have a rules engine, you probably need to have the ability to allow exceptions. And it was very obvious during the pandemic because we had customers where they couldn't work from home. They were not allowed to go to the office. And those few poor souls that were allowed to go to the office, they needed to have more entitlements added to their user accounts because otherwise they couldn't do their job, and therefore they were violating their configured audit rules. However, they had exception approval, so obviously someone else needed to accept or approve an exception. So yes, you are violating our rule, but we accept it. And typically an exception approval will have a time limit, right? It's okay for 14 days or something. Now, once you have rules, you could also have, you can simulate to see if this rule violates or not. You can compare different versions of your rule. Of course, there's our reports attached to the rules, and also you can assign mitigating controls to rules if you so wish. Mitigating controls are literally objects that are risk-reducing objects. You can say, I think Simon's favorite is that the person has taken the special security training and signed an NDA, and therefore you can violate this rule, but we consider it being less risky because we have applied this mitigating control. That's something in that sense, right, Simon? What you typically use?
Sorry. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So a mitigating control is a theoretical thing because you could argue and say if that's assigned to it, to the violation, we consider it being less risky because we have it under control in the way that this person who is violating the rule has been very much trained, right? They know exactly what to do and what not to do, especially, of course. Now, if you remember, Simon showed you one of the rules we have in this bootcamp lab, and rules, and also when we are going to talk about company policies, they work in the way that you have a working copy, and you can have as many working copies and you can have as many definitions as you wish. They are not in effect until you enable a working copy. So that's why you see two of them. And you can't modify an enabled rule. You can only modify a working copy and then enable that working copy again. So that's the way you sort of work when you are configuring audit rules. And the same goes for company policies. So obviously we have a rule in this demo lab, and you can have a laugh when you look at it because it's literally a stupid rule because we don't have any financial systems or an ERP platform or anything like that. What we do have is Active Directory. So we literally play around with Active Directory groups and saying we have groups that are not allowed to be in combination. Now, obviously, if you have someone who is violating a rule, and by default, we do have an individual in this lab who is literally violating one of the configured rules. So once you log in as, again, Mr. Ben Paxton, if you log in at that user, you're going to see that there is a pending rule violation. It's been going on for some time now, probably since the early this year, right? However, if you click on it, and this is not the person actually in the lab, I think it's Brittany Peters or something in the lab. We'll see in the demo. And the rule, we call it account payable and account receivable not allowed. Obviously, and that's pretty decent rule, right? If you work in account payable, you shouldn't have the same kind of capabilities in account receivable because then you could literally attest your own invoices, right? So that's a very common rule, but we made it extremely simplified, of course, inside this demo lab. Now, you can see that now Ben can deny the exception. What does it mean to deny an exception? It means that it's still red flagged, right? What does it mean to grant an exception? It means that it's still in violation, but it's been granted. And obviously, of course, you could also if you open up the rule, you could also have the third option, and that is resolve the rule violation. And to resolve a rule violation technically means that you're going to take something away from the person, because whatever it is that causes the violation, you can select one or more of them and say, take it away from this person, remove it from this individual. And as a result, hopefully, the rule will no longer be violated, at least not by that particular individual. Now, as I mentioned, these are audit rules, and they typically look at things like, first of all, is this rule does it apply to everyone? And secondly, it's combination of entitlements in applications. It could span across different applications. You can have a combination of things in one application in combination with something in another application. That could be defined as a violation. That's what the rule is going to detect, which is kind of neat because sometimes, for instance, I'm a developer, but I should not have administrative permissions to the production target system, for instance, right? That's probably entitlements in different systems to detect that as a rule violation. Now, we also have, as I mentioned, something we call company policies inside Identity Manager. And company policies are literally sort of, it looks the same in a way. We have an enabled policy and we have working copies. Now, for the audit rules, One Identity does not provide any rules out of the box. And for a simple reason, we don't really know what the customer potentially would like to have as rules. But we do provide a set of working copies for company policies, because company policies are more in the area of detecting data in formats or structures that we don't want to have inside our organizations. As you see on this particular example, all identities have a manager assigned. That's actually an out-of-the-box predefined policy. It's not enabled by default, but if you enable that one, it will look at all identity records inside Identity Manager and determine, are there anyone who does not have a manager? Because that could be a very clever policy, right? A manager, everyone should have a manager. Even if you're a consultant, someone needs to be responsible for you, right? And you can define your own. You can define a rule saying we are not allowed to have any system entitlements without descriptions. And guess what? That's going to find system entitlements without descriptions, right? And that could be a policy violation, for instance, right? As an almost stupid example. But it works in a similar way, but it's more flexible. Now, for any violations to policies, it can look like this for an exception approver if you allow for exceptions, right? It could be like PAM admins should have no entitlements, or they shouldn't have it direct or via group. That's not from this lab, but that's probably a clever policy, because if you're an administrator of a PAM platform, maybe you shouldn't have the right to use the platform as a user, because then you can allow yourself access, which is not necessarily good. And of course, everyone should have a manager and so on and so forth. Now, out of the box, we actually have quite a few policies that are company policies that are, or again, depending on the modules you select when you install, but they are all in working copies. They are not enabled. You have to manually go in and say, I want to enable all locations have a manager assigned that working copy, and then it will actually detect any location that doesn't have a manager. Again, this is also in the lab guide. You can try it out yourself. You can create your own policy from scratch, actually. There's a policy that doesn't exist, and you can create it from that instruction and hopefully find if there is any violations to it. Do you have anything to add to that, Simon?
Maybe on the company policy side, we mentioned about triggering attestations for the company policy.
Yeah, I was actually planning to show that.
Oh, fantastic.
But thank you. So I'm going to log out again here, and I'm going to log in as Ben Paxton again, because Ben Paxton is sort of a central figure in this demo lab. Excuse me. Oh, sorry, I needed to cough. When Ben Paxton logs in, he can see, and I'm not 100% sure if we have 2 pending rule violations in your lab, but obviously in this particular lab, we have 2 pending rule violations, and we have 1 pending attestation. Now, attestations we took care of already. So if we open up the pending rule violations, we can see that there are 2 rules being violated. Now, the first one, I'm just going to open it up to show you, but this is a rule that we have configured based on SAP. However, you can't really do anything because the SAP is so in read-only, because we have data from the SAP system, but we have literally, we can't do anything because it's just read-only data. If I click on it, I can see that this particular individual violates create account and create bank is not allowed on the same individual. And if I click on SAP functions, I can actually see that these are the reason why this rule has been, the roles in this case, why this rule is in violation. This is very SAP, and we can also see the actual T codes here that causes the violation. However, the rule that is much more simple, because this is a much more generic rule, we can see that there is a Brittany Peters, and she is violating the account payable, account receivable is not allowed. And it has no SAP function, of course, because it's not an SAP rule. Now, I can, of course, grant an exception, or I can resolve a rule violation, or I can deny the exception. Before I do that, let's take a look at the rule itself. And to do that, I need to go into this tool again. I can close a couple of tabs over there, and I will go to Identity Audit, and then I will click on Rule. Now, as you can see, we have 2 rules configured. And if I open the account payable, account receivable rule, I can see it's enabled. It does have a mitigating control, and it has an exception approver, and it's Ben Paxton who is the exception approver. It's actually a role. So we have assigned him that role, and we have a working copy, and we have 1 person in violation. So if I open up the working copy, Now I can see that there's a working copy, and this is the original rule, and I can now open up the rule itself. I can see we are now on version 3 on this rule. Now, what does it really do, right? Well, we saw Simon showing you this a bit earlier. This rule is violated by all identities. As you can see, we can change this to be and select a number of conditions to determine for whom should this rule apply. But I want it to apply to everyone inside the organization. I can click on the little information icon and see it's already one identity, and guess what? It's Brittany Peters, right? And then we have to have a condition, and the condition is a combination of main and sub-identities. And now we haven't touched upon sub-identities yet, but you can have a sub-identity, and this goes for both main and sub-identities if they have at least one entitlement. And as you can see, could be function, role, or organizational assignment, but I wanted to look at the entitlements of the type, and the type in this case is Active Directory, but it could be SAP or privileged account management or one login or LDAP or whatever. It depends on the what you have installed. I said Active Directory that meets all of the following sub conditions. Well, the name contains account payable. Now, obviously, are there any account payable? Does this match anything? If I click here, I can see there are 6 system entitlements that matches. There are finance account payable Stockholm, Umeå, finance SAP accounts. As you can see, the accounts is quite a matching thing, and the combination, of course, and the identity at least one entitlement of Active Directory again, that meets all of the following, and then I say accounts receivable, and I don't think it's 6 of them. It's only 5 of them, right? So anyone who has anything that matches, if you have this one and something on the accounts payable side, you're going to violate the rule. Now, if we take a quick look at Brittany Peters, and we find her first, and then we could just say find, and we say Brittany. I don't think we have that many Brittany's in the system. There's Brittany Peters. I'm not going to save the change to the rule. Here's Brittany Peters. She obviously works in finance in Sweden. That's good. And her primary business role is account receivable. Okay. She has an AD account. If I look at that AD account, she obviously has account receivable. She has that AD group, if I click on that AD group, I can see, well, this particular AD group actually belongs to the account receivable business role. That makes sense. Then I go back, and then I look at account receivable, account payable instead. It belongs to a business role, but obviously Brittany just has that Active Directory group assigned to her. So the reason why she's violating this particular rule is that I manually went in and just added that group to her Active Directory account. Now, if I go back to the web portal again and say, I want to resolve the rule violation. I'm not allowing Brittany to violate this rule no matter what. I'm not going to grant anything. I'm going to resolve it. So what's going to happen, it will literally show me the entitlement that contributes to this violation. And it shouldn't be a surprise now that it literally is these 2 Active Directory groups. That's why she's violating the rule in the first place. And it says, select the entitlement to be removed. I could remove both of them, but if you think about it, it would be enough to just remove one of them. So I'm going, because it's the combination that's the violation. So I'm going to select finance account receivable. I'm going to press next. Well, the following actions will be performed to remove the selected entitlement. Well, the primary assignment will be removed. Account receivable. Okay, well, I don't get it. So I'm still going to click next, actually. Then it will say, well, the identity will lose more. They will lose the following entitlements when selected action takes effect. Check the list to avoid unintentional loss of access. Why is she going to lose more? Well, it was a primary assignment. If I go back to the, for the fun of it, if I go back to the to Brittany Peters and I look at the actual business role she has, the business role contains these three groups: MS Office Pro, Sub Portal, and Finance Account Receivable. And guess what? That's exactly what you see of MS Office Pro. I'm not going to do this because we have to remove her primary role. I'm going to go back and I will try. What's going to happen if I click on that group instead? Let's try what happens. Well, it said the direct assignment will be removed. That's interesting. We click next. The identity will not lose any additional entitlement. That's even better, right? I'm going to remove that group from her. However, she's not going to lose anything more because luckily that was manually directly assigned to her. So I say, I'm done. Now, what's going to happen now, the screen is not updated yet, but if we take a look at the job queue here, there's actually a process called person in non-compliance. And now we can see it actually calculating, we need to delete an Active Directory account in a group. And at the end of the day, this will trigger an update to her Active Directory, to the Active Directory group. It hasn't really happened yet because it does, but it's now reaching out to Active Directory and removing her group, which is exactly what we wanted, right? So it's actually processing right now. So if I, for the fun of it, click on the start button here, and I click on, and this may or may not work, I start the ADUC, Active Directory Users and Computers, and I'll try to find Brittany. Brittany something. Here's Brittany Peters. And if I take a look at her memberships now, you're going to hopefully see, if I make that a bit bigger, that she has account receivable, but she does not have the group finance account payable anymore. So we have effectively actually not only taken away the violation inside Identity Manager, we have also carefully taken away what caused it in an application in the target system. That's pretty powerful, and we do it with what I typically refer as a consequence calculation. We inform the person in this case, hey, if you do this, she is going to lose more. Try the other one, or if it, so you can sort of cause the least harm to her, but she's no longer in violation. So as you can see, if I just remove, now she's gone from the list of people who are violating the rule. Does this make sense to you all? Can I see some thumbs up if you're still awake?
Yeah,
there are thumbs up.
Yeah, we got some thumbs up. Cool.
But no
Thank
questions.
You. Yeah. Well, that's because we explain so well, right,
that's
Simon?
What it is. That's what it is.
It must be. Now, as I mentioned, we also have company policies. So if I click on company policies for the fun of it, no, that's not what I wanted to do. There you go. Sorry. So if I click on company policies instead, and we can then see, do I have any policies? Well, I only have one policy enabled. However, if I click on working copies down here, these are the out-of-the-box working copies of policies that you can enable if you so wish. But the only one that we have enabled is all identities has a manager, have a manager assigned. And as you can see, there is a Robin Paulson who's actually violating this policy. Now, if I click on that one, and if I go to him, I can actually see Robin Paulson here. And guess what? He doesn't have a manager. The manager field is empty. If I go there and I go to his organization, I can see that the manager is not, he doesn't have a manager, which then of course leads to the violation of, of the policy. If I look at the working copy, I can also see that there is an exception approver, and obviously it needs to be checked. And if I log on as Ben Paxton again, and for some reason you have to look at the policy violations from here. So I can see that we do have a policy violator here. It's Robin Paulson. Exception denied. I have already denied it, but if I open it up like this, there is no button where I can say resolve. And there's a reason for it, because how do I resolve this? Because if it doesn't have a manager applied, that's probably because someone did something wrong at HR. So it needs to be fixed outside identity manager. So we can't really have the resolve button for policy violation, because sometimes it's not a problem inside, it's detected inside identity manager. But the true correction is probably that we should talk to, in this case, HR, because he's violating this policy, right? Now, one thing Simon mentioned here, if we look at the working copy of the policy, what we can do, which we're not doing in this lab, we could say that start an attestation of a new rule violation immediately. And first we need to select an attestation. And I need to click on that one. Then I can select. How come I can't do that? Am I not in the
working copy? You got to be on the working
copy.
Yeah,
we start off with a say no. We go to the working copy. I open the working copy. That's an interesting thing. Maybe because it's a built-in one. Strange.
Strange.
Because it should be possible to select an attestation. I actually never tried it with this one. But if you create your own policy, definitely you can do that. So you can say any violations should run through this attestation policy immediately. So when there's violators, there will be attestation cases where you could say, I'm not going to say yes to this, or I'm going to fix this, or whatever, right? So that's the idea behind it. And this is a function that hasn't been in the product for more than one minor version, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Or perhaps, yeah. It's quite new, actually, to be able to start an attestation of new violators immediately. Really handy, because it gives you another tool in the toolbox to what's going to happen if we have a policy violation. Yes, so that was sort of policies. Now, audit features, right? There's quite a lot of things, and you've already seen quite a lot of this already. We intentionally do a lot of audit and show a lot of audit features almost from the beginning this morning. For instance, you were looking at instead, if we are looking at a specific identity, and you saw Simon looking at things, what's actually assigned to this particular individual. I'm looking at an identity called Ernst Meyer, and I'm clicking on business roles, and that will show you any additional business role that this particular individual has. And I can see that it's also assigned from an assignment request. He has the web developer role. So that's something for an auditor, for instance, they can go in and view people directly in the web portal. And if they need a report, they can issue reports, of course. Now, we could also look at how, in this case, how did he gain access to this particular business role? So we can see the workflow inside the portal. So it was a request. It was done by Ernst himself. I'm not sure how well you can read this. It was done by Ernst himself. It was approved by Carl Vance and then Mia Schneider, because it was a request that required 2 steps approval. We could see when it happened, of course. So that's something, that's audit. You can see whatever happened and do the assignment analysis. You can do that directly from the web portal, of course. We can look at historical records. In this case, we're looking at an identity called Olof Palmgren, very Swedish name. And we can see that there were some changes made at the 27th of October in 2023, and we can scroll up and scroll down, and you saw Simon also clicked on these different buttons here, and you can say, I want to look at what did it look like between these two dates. So you can see sort of what historically this particular object looked like. I'm looking at an identity in this example, but we could also, of course, see historical information about in this case, a business role. We're looking at a business role called application developer, and we can see, and we should be able to see Ernst here. We don't, because it's different screenshots here, but we can see that there was a membership added to this particular individual at this point in time, but the role itself was created 2 years earlier. Again, this comes from this demo environment, so not that much happened to it. We're looking at a role in this example. We can see the historical history audit for any kind of object almost. So we're looking at an organization, in this case, the IT Sweden department, that we can see that it was created in 2018, but we had some updates going on last year, at least from this screenshot. If we look at it today, probably if we go into and look at the IT UK, we can see that Steve Bailey, he was added and removed. That's going to be historical records for that particular department in this version of the demo that we have. You also seen those graphical overviews. Now these, what we call we call them hyperviews. They are definitely available in the tooling we have, in the manager tool that we showed you when I played around with the roles, for instance, and the IT shop. But they are also, as you've seen, available inside the web portal. And depending on who you are allowed or not allowed to drill down into it. So you can say, okay, so it has an AD account, it has these groups. What groups, if I click on a group, who else has access to this group, and so on and so forth. And you can click on almost all of them to get more information. So you can spend a couple of hours drilling around in the environment if you so wish, right? And that, of course, goes for an identity, but it also applies to, in this case, a business role, the business role PR, for instance. We can see that these are the entitlements and these are the primary assigned identities. But it's not limited to that. We can look at, in this case, we are looking at an AD group as an example. We can also actually drill down to look at the actual Active Directory domain if we so wish, right? So there's a lot of these hyperviews available, of course, in the web portal, but even more so in the provided tooling. You've seen some reports already. You've seen the report. I think Simon issued at least one report, and I issued a report for an attestation. Now, there's quite a lot of reports out of the box in this platform. There are reports, obviously, for where you can report on identities. You can do comparison reports between identities if you so wish. I think there is a use case documented for that. I might be wrong, but I think so. And we use a model with a subscription model, so you can make the subscription requestable. So you can publish in the IT shop the right to subscribe to a role with an approval policy. And once it's approved, that the recipient of that request can then subscribe to a report. And when you subscribe, you configure what kind of, or what document formats are you allowed to, first of all, what's allowed in the report, and secondly, what format do you want this report to be delivered to you? And typically, when you subscribe to a report, you are going to deliver it by email. But we could also put it on your home drive or something like that, right? And you probably would say, I'm a manager, I want this report to be delivered to me every first of every month or something like that, because I want to take a look at something very particular. Or if you're a target system owner or something like that, then you can subscribe to the reports. Some of the reports you can actually issue directly inside the web portal. As you saw, Simon just issued a report on a particular individual, and I issued a report from access review or an attestation campaign. There's also a report builder inside the web portal. It's a bit limited, I would say. And on top of that, we do have provide a report editor. Now, the provided report editor is called Report Designer, or Report Editor, I think it's actually called, where you can take a copy of one of the existing reports, make your own copy, modify it, publish it, and make it available inside the solution. And of course, you can create your own reports from scratch, of course. And through GitHub, you could also get a module so you can connect with Microsoft Power BI to create reports using Microsoft Power BI, which has, I think it's becoming increasingly more popular. And also, we are going to have a native support for it in coming version. At least that's what I've heard.
That's correct. I'm not 100% sure if it's the next version or the version after that, but yes, it could be the next version.
Yeah, it could be the next version. Honestly, I don't know actually. Now, I'm not going to demo that much because we already looked at this. So instead, I'm going to jump on the last topic for today, and I think that will be done in way before 5 o'clock, hopefully, right? We still have until 5 o'clock Central Time, right, Susanne?
We do. Yeah. That's the plan.
So the last thing we want to look at today is something we call privileged access governance or privileged account governance, or the PAG module. Now, if we take a look at what it is, I'll hopefully try to explain what it is and what you can do with it, and who's it for, and how can you get access to it. Now, obviously, if you have an identity manager solution, such as Identity Manager, a proper IGA solution, that is a solution that you will integrate that to all your target application, business applications, whatever, and you will also configure integrations to your authoritative sources or master data sources, typically HR systems, so you can get identity records into it. It will provide this rich user interface, of course. You've seen quite a lot of it today. And inside the identity management platform, we will take care of people, right? Primarily people. It could be other types of identities, but primarily we will take care of people. And we will make sure that they have access to the correct target system or applications. And within those, they have appropriate entitlements. They should have, based on where they work, what kind of role they have, things they have requested, and so on and so forth, right? Now, that's the left-hand side. That's what we've been talking about all day, I would say. On the right-hand side, you have typically a PAM platform. Now, a PAM platform, a privileged access management platform, is typically something that every organization should have a PAM platform. We can't really demand that everyone should have our specific PAM platform called Safeguard. We want that, of course, right? But every organization should have a privileged access management platform in one form or another. And typical things that you get from a PAM platform is a vault and the ability to monitor and record sessions. So whenever anyone has access to administrative accounts, super user accounts, typical accounts that are highly sensible, high-risk accounts. They are accounts you use for configurations, for system maintenance, system management, and so on and so forth. That should be handled by a PAM platform. Well, the simplest thing is that they actually need each other. These two types of platforms need each other. And for the moment, we have a discussion with I'm not going to name any names. We have a customer in Sweden who are already running our IGA solution, and they are now in the process of buying a PAM platform. But they don't see yet. They are slowly realizing that maybe the team managing the PAM platform and the team managing the IGA platform should talk to each other. And the simple reason, right? Because they definitely need information from each other. A simple use case, the PAM platform should definitely know if someone should no longer have access to it because the person originating here actually left the organization. And it's not a good situation if you have a person who has left the organization, but they can still access the PAM platform. That's not necessarily good security practice. And also, if you go to your HR department and say, we're going to hire a new person into our IT operations department, it's highly unlikely that anyone within human resources will know that this person will then obviously need access to the PAM platform. But the IGA solution could definitely determine the fact that, hey, I'm responsible for this team of administrators, and I have requested within the IGA solution that they should have access to the PAM platform, and within the PAM platform, these are the things they should have access to. And if that level of control, you could have that from the IGA platform, but not necessarily from the HR system. So it's not going to help you to integrate HR directly to PAM, because HR wouldn't know if you should have PAM or not, right? But the IGA and all the processes you can define in here, you can definitely answer the question, should this person or should this person not have access to the PAM platform? And even more important, the person in a mover scenario, right? Simon showed you moved your guy from UK to Sweden, right, Simon?
That's correct.
Yeah, it's highly likely that anything that particular individual had access through in the PAM platform that was very related to the UK location should be removed when that person moves to Sweden. And perhaps the person should then be allowed access to the PAM platform to manage things in Sweden, as a stupid example. So for this purpose, we have a module. It's a module inside Identity Manager that makes it possible for us to connect to the PAM platform. And if the PAM platform happens to be safeguard, we can literally also understand the authorization model inside the PAM platform itself. So what you get out of this is, of course, a way for you to maintain and to take care of who should have access to our PAM platform. And of course, when they have access, what should they have access to inside the PAM platform? We are not taking over the PAM platform's job. We are just going to be able for us to actually provision users and user group memberships in the PAM platform, saying, I want Simon should have access to the PAM platform, and within the PAM platform, he should have this sort of memberships in these groups, for instance. And what that means then is the PAM platform will then, that means that you will have access to this and this and this and this, right? That you could do with this module. And perhaps even more importantly, you can centralize the governance, compliance, and policy administration, meaning that you can do access reviews saying, hey, this is potentially probably what you want to review, right? You want to be able to say that on a monthly basis, we actually review what people have access to inside our PAM platform, because it is our security state. So it needs to be properly governed. And we can do that inside Identity Manager. Now, you could also argue that there are PAM solutions that provide this kind of functions, but then you have two governance platforms. Then you need to yourself compile the actual report what people have access to. We're a strong believer that you should centralize your governance so you have one view. You can look at things in one place, because then you can definitely spot if there is something that's wrong, right? Simon shouldn't have this. We can see it in an access review. We can even configure compliancy rules and an audit rules saying, hey, if Simon has administrative access to this particular server, that's not good because he's also a developer and he's not allowed to push code to the production system, as a stupid example, right? Now, sorry.
I was just about to say another good example would be the risk that's involved. So just because someone does have access to your PAM solution and has access to and can have the capabilities to get the admin password or get access to a session, then their risk is higher. So therefore, they might need additional approvals for additional things that you request at a future point in time.
Yeah, perfect example. Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Now, one thing that we have talked about it a bit. You heard Susanne mention this morning, and this is this area at the bottom here. This is one of the things that we can provide with the PAG module for customers who have both Identity Manager and One Identity Safeguard PAM platform. And it's the behavior-driven governance based on usage. And it's actually application usage. It's not. We can of course detect that we've given Simon access to the PAM platform, but he had never logged in. That's not that much of a behavior driven. It's more like, yeah, we can see that, right? He's never logged in for half a year, so maybe he shouldn't have access to the PAM platform because he never uses it. But with this integration, we go way deeper. We could. And this is, you have to configure it properly, but we could say that in the PAM platform, Simon has the right to do 5 different things. He can use these accounts, he can use these sessions, and he can use this. And he has 5 different things. But we can detect that out of these 5 things he has the right to use in the PAM platform, he's only used 4 of them. One of them hasn't been used for, let's say, 90 days. Then we could actually challenge that and say, hey, if you have this permission to do this with the PAM platform, but you never do it, maybe we should take it away from you. We can make it requestable so you can have it if you desperately need it. Because, and the reason is simple, right? The less you have access to, the better, I would say, from a security point. It's the least privileged principle. If you have capabilities inside the PAM platform that you never use, you shouldn't have it, because that if you take that away, then you lower the exposure, right? And the attack surface gets smaller, because if you don't use it, then you're going to lose it. And that integration actually includes that we do synchronize user activity events from our safeguard platform into Identity Manager. Therefore, we can make those attestations. We can detect it, and we can run attestation campaigns where someone can say, well, if you haven't used it for that long, we're going to take it away from you because you obviously don't need it, right? So that's part of the integration. And it's not a common thing amongst all the other competitors on the market, but we can definitely do this, right? So what does it look like when you have this integration? Now, in this demo lab, we have data from a PAM platform synchronized. You can look at it, but you can't really change anything because it is literally read-only. The target system is not there anymore. But we do have some data synchronized from a PAM platform, a safeguard PAM platform. And since we know the platform, we also understand the authorization model and all the objects inside of it. So we can see that there are privileged access management assets and privileged accounts and privileged directory accounts. We can see PAM user accounts, and we can see PAM user groups. We can see entitlements, which is what are you really entitled to do? And we can also see if there is a directory involved there. And we can assign ownership, and we can also assign account definitions. So we can create PAM users from Identity Manager. So let's take a look at an example of a person. This is a person called Ronald Stevenson. He has an Active Directory account. Well, yeah, of course he has, but he also has a PAM account. And this is because this integration is literally a rich connector. It's a connector as any other connectors we have in Identity Manager. You have to configure it, of course. You have to connect to the PAM platform. You have to synchronize it, and then you can start using it. So in this particular case, we can see that Ronald has a PAM user account. We can see in which appliance he has the account, or which cluster in this case, but it's only a standalone one in this example. We can click on that account so we can see, okay, so this is Ronald's PAM user account. It obviously comes from this appliance. It belongs to this particular individual, and we can see that he has some group assigned to him. If we click on further on, we can click on the group itself, and then we can see that this particular group has other PAM user accounts and also an entitlement. And we can drill further down into the entitlement, and we can actually find the actual scope of that request. What is he allowed to do? He's allowed to, for instance, request the password for this particular user account on this particular server. That we can see all the way inside Identity Manager, and therefore we can do attestations. We can configure attestations inside, again, as Ben Paxton is not going to give you that much in this particular demo lab because it's sort of stale data, but you can search for attestation procedure that starts with PAM, and that will give you the list of things that you can actually attest inside the PAM platform itself. And once you've done that, you can run an attestation campaign, and in this case, I'm saying, should the Windows Session PAM user group be assigned to the PAM user account Ann Robertson? Of course, we could also have recommendations here, right? But if we click on this particular one, I can actually see more usage information. I can see it was the last time it was used was at this particular point in time. It's so long time ago. And this, what we're looking at is not the previous screen, is Johan Granström. He has the right to use the local admin 1 on this LDAP server. It's a Windows server. He's allowed to run RDP, a remote desktop, but he hasn't done it for a very long time. So maybe we should say no to it because he shouldn't have that entitlement anymore. So we can look quite deep into the PAM platform and do clever access reviews upon it, of course, right? And finally, of course, there are reports. And the first report I would say that you should always run as soon as you have integrated your IGA solution with your PAM platform. Are there any orphaned account inside our PAM platform? Now, an orphaned account is a user account that we cannot match and link to an identity record inside Identity Manager. Now, that might be okay when you install the PAG module, but it's definitely not okay once you have had that module in place for some time, right? It means that we don't know who these people are, but they definitely have access to the PAM platform. And they have group membership, so they can do things in the PAM platform, but we don't know who they are. And if that's not a risk flag for an organization, I don't really know what the risk flag is, right? So that actually was everything we intended to show today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And at least a couple of people are still awake.